I should have seen the signs earlier. Not the weather signs, those I caught just fine. The National Weather Service had been issuing tornado watches since noon, and I'd spent the afternoon securing loose items in my backyard and checking my emergency kit. 43 years of living in Oklahoma had taught me to respect the sky when it turned that particular shade of green. No, the signs I should have seen weren't about the storm bearing down on Moore County. They were about my son David, and how 3 years of success had slowly eroded whatever respect he'd once had for his old man. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Down at 4:17 p.m. on May 15th, I was standing in my kitchen making a ham sandwich when the tornado siren started wailing. The sound still gives me chills, that mechanical howl that means you have minutes, maybe seconds, to make decisions that could save your life or end it. I grabbed my transistor radio, a flashlight, and the photo album Eleanor had insisted I keep in the hall closet, and headed for the storm cellar behind the house. The wind was already picking up, whipping the oak trees in my yard like they were saplings instead of 100-year-old giants. The cellar was just a concrete box my grandfather had dug in 1952, 8 feet underground with a heavy wooden door that rattled every time thunder rolled overhead. It wasn't comfortable, but it had kept 3 generations of my family safe through dozens of storms. I'd been down there maybe 20 minutes, listening to the weather radio crackle with updates. Large and extremely dangerous tornado. Significant structural damage likely. Take shelter immediately when the freight train sound started. That's how everyone describes it afterward, and it's the only comparison that makes sense. Like a massive locomotive was rolling directly overhead, except locomotives don't scream and howl and make the very air vibrate in ways that make your teeth ache. Cellar door shook so violently I thought it might tear off its hinges. Dirt rained down from the ceiling. The single bulb I'd switched on flickered and went out, leaving me in complete darkness with only the radio for company. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. Silence. Complete. Absolute silence. I waited another 20 minutes before I climbed out of that cellar, and when I did, I stepped into a different world. My house, the 2-story colonial where I'd raised David and his sister Sarah, where Eleanor and I had spent 31 years of marriage before cancer took her, was simply gone. Not damaged. Not partially destroyed. Gone. Where my front porch used to be, there was a pile of splintered wood and twisted metal that might once have been my pickup truck. My kitchen table was embedded in what remained of the Hendersons' fence 3 lots over. Mrs. Patterson's garden gnome was sitting in the middle of what used to be my living room, perfectly intact and grinning at the devastation like he was enjoying the joke. I stood there for a long time, holding Eleanor's photo album and trying to process what I was seeing. 43 years of accumulated life furniture, and photographs and books and records and tools and appliances and all the small objects that make a house feel like home scattered across 6 city blocks or simply erased from existence. The weird thing about total loss is how your mind tries to catalog what's missing. I found myself thinking, where's my coffee maker? And I hope they can find my tax records before the bigger realization hit. I was homeless. At 71 years old, after 4 decades of steady work and responsible living and doing everything you're supposed to do to build a secure life. I was standing in a pile of rubble with nothing but the clothes on my back and a photo album full of memories of people and places that no longer existed. The emergency crews arrived about an hour later. Fire trucks and ambulances and volunteers from the Red Cross setting up tables and tents in the local high school gymnasium. They were kind and efficient and full of helpful information about insurance claims and temporary housing assistance. Do you have family in the area? Asked a young woman with a clipboard and a concerned expression. Somewhere you can stay while we sort out the insurance situation? My son lives about 30 miles north, I told her. In Edmond. That's good. Family's important at times like this. I nodded and took the disaster relief package she handed me, full of forms and phone numbers and information about FEMA assistance. Then I borrowed a phone and called David. "Dad?" His voice was tight with concern when he answered. "Thank God. I saw the news about Moore County. Are you okay? Is the house ... The house is gone, son," I said. Tornado took everything. The silence that followed stretched long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. "Gone?" he said finally. "Completely. I'm at the high school now with the Red Cross folks, but I need somewhere to stay until I can figure out what comes next." Another pause. "Of course, Dad. Of course you can stay here. Lisa and I have the guest room set up. How are you getting here? I'll figure something out. Maybe catch a ride with one of the volunteers. No, I'll come get you. Give me the address." An hour and a half later, David pulled up in his silver BMW, looking like he'd come straight from the office. At 38, my son had done well for himself, MBA from Oklahoma University, senior partner at a consulting firm, house in one of Edmond's nicest neighborhoods. He wore success like a well-tailored suit, and usually I was proud of how far he'd come from his blue-collar beginnings. But when he got out of the car and saw me sitting on the school steps with Eleanor's photo album and nothing else, something flickered across his face that I couldn't quite read. Not sympathy, exactly. Something more complicated. "Jesus, Dad," he said, looking me up and down. "You really lost everything." "Everything but what matters," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Long as nobody got hurt, the rest is just stuff." "Right," he said, but I could tell he didn't really believe it. David had always been a man who measured security in terms of possessions and net worth. The idea of losing everything probably terrified him more than it did me. The drive to Edmond was quiet. David asked a few questions about the tornado, about what I planned to do next, about whether I'd contacted my insurance company. Practical questions. The kind of questions you ask when you're trying to solve a problem, rather than comfort a person. His house was exactly what you'd expect from a successful consultant with no children and expensive tastes. Clean lines, neutral colors, furniture that looked like it had been purchased from a catalog rather than accumulated over years of living. Lisa met us at the door with appropriate expressions of concern and sympathy. "Frank, I'm so sorry," she said, hugging me with the careful politeness of someone who'd married into a family rather than been born into it. "This must be so overwhelming. I appreciate you both taking me in," I said. "It's just temporary until I can figure out what comes next." "Of course," Lisa said quickly. "Stay as long as you need," but something in her tone suggested that as long as you need had definite limitations. They showed me to the guest room, a sterile space decorated in shades of beige and blue, with a queen bed that had clearly never been slept in and artwork that had been chosen for its ability to match the bella. Curtains rather than evoke any particular emotion. "There are towels in the bathroom," Lisa said, "and I put some of David's old clothes in the closet in case you need anything." "Thank you," I said. "I'll try not to be any trouble." "You're not trouble, Dad," David said, but he was checking his watch as he said it. "I have a conference call in 20 minutes, but we can talk more over dinner. Figure out a plan. As if losing everything you own was simply a logistical challenge that could be solved with proper organization and strategic thinking. After they left me alone, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened Eleanor's photo album. The pictures had gotten a little damp in the storm cellar, but they were intact. Eleanor on our wedding day, looking radiant in her grandmother's dress. David and Sarah as children, building snowmen and opening Christmas presents and posing for school pictures. Family vacations to Colorado and Texas, and that one memorable trip to Disney World when the kids were small. 43 years of life, reduced to 67 photographs in a water-damaged album. I was still looking at the pictures when I heard David and Lisa talking in the kitchen. their voices carrying down the hallway in the way voices do in houses with good acoustics and thin walls. How long do you think he'll stay? Lisa was asking. I don't know, David replied. The insurance will take weeks to sort out, maybe months. And even then, he'll have to decide whether to rebuild or, I don't know, move somewhere else. Somewhere else like where? Assisted living, maybe. He's 71. Lisa, this might be the wake-up call he needed to admit he can't keep living independently. Assisted living. I'd been homeless for exactly 6 hours, and my son was already planning to warehouse me somewhere with recreational activities and meal plans and nurses who called you sweetie, whether you wanted them to or not. But he seemed so healthy, Lisa said, for now. But what happens when he's not? What happens when he falls and breaks a hip, or has a heart attack, or develops dementia? Are we supposed to drop everything and become his caregivers? He's your father, David. I know he's my father. That doesn't mean I'm ready to turn our lives upside down because he's too stubborn to plan for the future. I closed the photo album and set it on the nightstand, trying to process what I'd just heard. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle and throw a curveball, who I'd worked double shifts to send to college, who I'd been proud of every single day of his life, was already looking for ways to get rid of me. The tornado had taken my house, but maybe it had also revealed something about my family that I'd been too blind to see before. Maybe. I'd lost more than just my possessions in that storm. Dinner was polite and awkward, full of careful questions about my insurance coverage and gentle suggestions about what I might do in the long term. David had done research. During his conference call, pulled up information about senior living communities in the area, printed out articles about disaster recovery for older adults. The thing is, Dad, he said over Lisa's expertly prepared salmon, this could actually be an opportunity. A chance to downsize, simplify your life. Maybe find somewhere with more support services. Support services, I repeated. You know, meal preparation, housekeeping, medical assistance if you need it. Places where you don't have to worry about maintaining property or dealing with repairs. I've been maintaining property for 50 years, I said. I think I can handle it, but why should you have to? Lisa chimed in. There are wonderful communities out there where you could focus on enjoying your retirement instead of worrying about yard work and home repairs. They meant well. I could see that. They genuinely thought they were helping, offering practical solutions to a practical problem. But what they didn't understand was that home isn't just about having a roof over your head. It's about having a place where you belong, where your presence is wanted rather than tolerated, where you're family instead of a problem to be solved. I'll think about it, I said, because it was easier than explaining why their suggestions felt like a betrayal. That night, lying in the guest bed between sheets that smelled like fabric softener and stranger's detergent, I stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what came next. I could rebuild, assuming the insurance came through. Find a contractor, pick out new fixtures, spend the next year turning a construction site back into something that resembled home. I could take David's advice and move into one of those senior communities, trade independence for security and convenience, or I could do something else entirely. Something that might require more courage than I had left, but might also lead to something better than just recreating the life I'd lost. The problem was, I didn't know what something else looked like. What I did know was that I was 71 years old, homeless, and staying in my son's guest room, where I was clearly not welcome, for longer than absolutely necessary. What I didn't know yet was just how unwelcome I really was. That revelation would come 3 days later, when the insurance adjuster finished his assessment, and I realized I was going to be staying with David and Lisa for weeks, maybe months. While the claim was processed and decisions were made, that's when I discovered exactly what my son thought about having his old man around, and it wasn't pretty. Asterisk. The insurance adjuster was a thin man in his 50s named Gary, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried a clipboard like it was a sacred text. He spent 3 hours walking through what remained of my property, taking photographs and measurements and notes about things like total structural loss and contents replacement value. I met him at the site on Thursday morning, 3 days after the tornado. The cleanup crews had already been through, hauling away the larger debris and anything that might be dangerous, but the lot still looked like a war zone. Splintered wood and twisted metal scattered across bare earth where my garden used to be. A child's tricycle that belonged to someone else wedged into the remains of my garage. "Mr. Patterson," Gary said, adjusting his glasses as he studied his clipboard, "I'm going to be straight with you. Your policy covers rebuilding, but we're looking at a minimum of 18 months from the time you approve the plans until you can move back in." 18 months. I repeated. Could be longer, depending on contractor availability and weather delays. Tornado season tends to create a backlog of construction projects. He handed me a thick folder full of forms and estimates and timelines that made my head spin just looking at them. "In the meantime, you'll receive temporary living assistance payments, but those are capped at 12 months. After that, you're responsible for your own housing costs." I did the math in my head. 12 months of assistance, 18 months of construction. That left 6 months where I'd be paying for temporary housing while also paying for the rebuild. At my age, with my fixed income, that was going to be a problem. What if I decided not to rebuild? I asked. Gary shrugged. "Then you'd receive the settlement amount minus your deductible. Should be enough to buy something smaller, maybe a condo or a manufactured home." After he left, I sat in David's BMW in the driveway of my former house and tried to make sense of the numbers. The settlement would be enough for a down payment on something modest, but not enough to buy outright. At 71, getting approved for a mortgage wasn't going to be easy, even with good credit and Social Security income. For the first time since the tornado hit, I felt genuinely scared. Not about my physical safety that had been settled the moment I climbed out of the storm cellar alive, but about my future. About what it meant to be starting over with nothing at an age when most people were settling into retirement and stability. I drove back to David's house slowly, taking the long way through neighborhoods where other people's lives continued unchanged. Kids playing in driveways, women hanging laundry on lines, men mowing lawns that hadn't been destroyed by forces beyond their control. David was home when I arrived, which was unusual for a Thursday afternoon. He was sitting at his kitchen island with his laptop open, but he closed it when I walked in. "How did it go with the adjuster?" he asked. I told him about the timeline, the costs, the complications. He listened without interrupting, nodding at appropriate moments and asking practical questions about policy limits and contractor estimates. 18 months, he said when I finished. "That's a long time." Gary said it could be longer. "Right?" David drummed his fingers on the granite countertop. "Dad, we need to talk about the living situation here." My stomach clenched. This was the conversation I'd been dreading since overhearing him talking to Lisa 3 days earlier. "Lisa and I," he continued, "we've been discussing your options, and we think this could actually be a blessing in disguise." "A blessing," I said flatly. "Think about it. You're 71 years old, living alone in a house that was way too big for one person. The upkeep, the yard work, the isolation. This tornado might have done you a favor by forcing you to consider alternatives." "Alternatives like what?" David pulled out his laptop and opened it to a website he'd clearly bookmarked. "Sunrise Manor," he said, turning the screen toward me. "It's a senior living community about 20 minutes from here. They have independent living units, assisted care if you need it, even memory care if that becomes necessary." The website showed smiling, Elderly people playing cards and tending gardens and participating in what looked like organized fun. Everyone looked clean and well-fed and completely miserable. I'm not ready for a nursing home. David, asterisk, it's not a nursing home, it's independent living. You'd have your own apartment, your own kitchen, but with services available if you need them. Meals, housekeeping, transportation, social activities. And it costs how much? David's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Well, that's the thing. It's not cheap. But if you sell the lot where your house was and combine that with the insurance settlement, you'd have enough for the entrance fee and probably 5 or 6 years of monthly costs. 5 or 6 years, I said. And then what? Then we figure something else out. We, as if he was planning to be involved in whatever came after I ran out of money to pay for institutional care. What if I want to rebuild? I asked, Dad, be realistic. You're not getting any younger. Do you really want to spend the next 2 years dealing with contractors and construction delays and cost overruns? Do you want to be back in a big house by yourself, worrying about maintenance and repairs and what happens if you fall down the stairs? I've been taking care of myself for 71 years, I said. I think I can manage a few more. Can you? Because the statistics on elderly people living alone aren't great. Falls, medical emergencies, social isolation. I'm not elderly, I interrupted. I'm experienced. David closed his laptop with the patient sigh of someone dealing with a difficult child. Dad, I'm trying to help you here. I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Everyone meaning who? Meaning you. And Lisa and me. This isn't easy for us either, having a house guest indefinitely. There it was. The truth underneath all the concern and practical advice. I wasn't a father staying with his son in a time of crisis. I was a house guest who'd overstayed his welcome. I see, I said quietly. It's not personal, Dad. It's just that Lisa and I have our routines, our privacy. We're not used to having someone else in the house all the time. How long? I asked. How long what? How long before I stop being welcome here? David had the grace to look uncomfortable. It's not about being welcome. It's about finding the best long-term solution for your needs. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his closed laptop. The insurance will cover temporary housing, he said finally. Maybe it would be better if you looked into a hotel or an extended stay place while you figure things out. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You want me to leave. I want you to have options. I want you to make the choice that's right for you, not the choice that's most convenient for everyone else. But we both knew what he really meant. He wanted his house back. He wanted his routine back. He wanted his life back to the way it was before his inconvenient father had showed up needing help. Okay, I said, standing up from the kitchen stool. I'll look into other arrangements. Dad, don't be like that. We're trying to help. No, you're trying to solve a problem. And the problem is me. I left him sitting in his kitchen with his laptop full of assisted living websites and his carefully planned solutions for getting rid of his old man, and I went upstairs to the guest room that had never felt less like home. Eleanor's photo album was still sitting on the nightstand where I'd left it. I picked it up and flipped through the pages, looking at pictures of a life that had seemed stable and permanent right up until the moment it was swept away by wind and circumstances beyond my control. There was a picture of David's college graduation, Eleanor and me flanking him in his cap and gown, all of us grinning at the camera like we had the world figured out. He'd been so proud that day, talking about his plans for the future, the difference he was going to make in the world. I wondered when he'd stopped seeing his parents as people and started seeing us as problems to be managed. My phone rang. Sarah? Dad? I just talked to David. He told me about the insurance situation. Sarah lived in Denver with her husband and 2 teenagers. She'd been trying to get time off work to come help me sort through the aftermath, but her company was in the middle of a merger and she couldn't get away. It's complicated. I said, "He said you were looking at extended stay hotels while you decide about rebuilding. Something like that? Dad, is everything okay?" "You sound, I don't know, defeated." I almost told her then. Almost explained that her brother was treating me like an unwanted houseguest and pushing senior living facilities like they were the solution to all my problems. But Sarah had enough stress in her life without adding family drama to the mix. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just trying to figure out what comes next. Maybe you should come stay with us for a while. The guest room here isn't much, but your brother thinks I should look into senior communities. Independent living situations." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to look into senior communities?" It was the first time anyone had asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what I should want. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know what I want anymore." "That's okay, Dad. You don't have to know right now. You don't have to make any big decisions. While you're still processing what happened, your brother seems to think I do. My brother thinks every problem can be solved with a spreadsheet and a 5-year plan," Sarah said with the affectionate exasperation of a sister who loved her sibling but knew his flaws. "That doesn't mean he's right." After we hung up, I lay on the guest bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about choices in family and what it meant to belong somewhere. David came upstairs around dinner time to tell me that Lisa was making pot roast, and I was welcome to join them, but his tone suggested it was more obligation than invitation. "Actually," I said, "I think I'll grab a bite somewhere else tonight. Give you two some space." Relief flickered across his face so quickly he probably didn't realize I'd seen it. "Are you sure?" "There's plenty of food, I'm sure. I need to get out of the house anyway, maybe drive around and think about things." "Okay, well, if you change your mind, ... But we both knew I wouldn't change my mind. I drove to the Cracker Barrel on the interstate, ordered meatloaf and mashed potatoes and green beans, and ate dinner alone at a table for 4 while families around me laughed and argued and lived their lives in ways that seemed enviably normal. Halfway through my meal, a man about my age at the next table started choking on his food. His wife began screaming for help while his adult daughter tried to perform the Heimlich maneuver with shaking hands. Without thinking, I stood up and took over. 3 sharp thrusts to his diaphragm, and a piece of cornbread flew out of his mouth onto the floor. He gasped and coughed and took great shuddering breaths while his family thanked me over and over again. "Are you a doctor?" his daughter asked. "Retired machinist," I said. "But I took first aid classes for 40 years at the plant. You never know when you'll need it." The man grabbed my hand with both of his. "You saved my life," he said, tears in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary," I told him. "Just glad I could help." As I drove back to David's house, I thought about that moment, how it felt to be needed, to be useful, to have knowledge and experience that mattered to someone else. How different it was from being treated like a burden or a problem to be solved. David was in his home office when I got back, door closed, probably working on client projects or researching more senior living options for his inconvenient father. I went upstairs to the guest room and started looking at hotel websites on my phone. Extended stay places with kitchenettes and weekly rates. Temporary solutions for people in transition. But as I scrolled through listings and read reviews, I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. I wasn't looking for temporary housing. I was looking for home. And I was starting to understand that home wasn't a place I was going to find in David's house, no matter how long he let me stay. The question was, where would I find it? The answer to that question would come sooner than I expected, and from a direction I never saw coming. The conversation that changed everything happened on Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after the tornado destroyed my life. I was sitting at David's kitchen island, drinking coffee and pretending to read the newspaper while actually eavesdropping on the phone call he was having in his home office. The door was closed, but sound carried in that house, and I'd gotten good at picking up the important parts of conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. "No, Lisa, I understand your concerns," David was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "But we can't just kick him out. He's my father." I couldn't hear Lisa's response. She was apparently at her sister's house for the weekend, but I could guess the content from David's replies. "I know it's affecting our routine. I know it's stressful. But what exactly do you want me to do?" More silence then. He won't even look at the brochures I gave him. Every time I bring up Sunrise Manor, he changes the subject. Sunrise Manor, the assisted living place he'd been pushing since Wednesday. "Well, maybe you're right," David said finally. "Maybe he needs a reality check about what his options actually are." I set down my coffee cup very carefully and focused on appearing absorbed in an article about city council budget meetings. David emerged from his office a few minutes later, wearing the expression of a man who'd made a difficult decision and wasn't entirely comfortable with it. "Dad," he said, settling onto the stool across from me, "we need to have another conversation about your living situation." "Okay," I said, not looking up from the newspaper. "Lisa and I, we've been talking, and we think it might be better if you stayed somewhere else while you're figuring out your long-term plans." I kept reading about proposed changes to the municipal parking ordinance, but the words weren't registering anymore. "Somewhere else," I repeated, "just temporarily. There's an extended stay America about 10 minutes from here. It has kitchenettes, weekly rates, all the conveniences you'd need while you're sorting through the insurance stuff." I set down the newspaper and looked at my son. Really looked at him. "You want me to move out? I want you to have space to make the right decisions for your future without feeling pressured by our situation here. Your situation." "Dad, please don't make this harder than it already is." "How hard is it for you, David? Having your homeless father sleep in your guest room for a week? That's not fair, isn't it?" I stood up, suddenly too angry to sit still. "Your house gets destroyed by a tornado, you call your son for help, and he puts you up for exactly 7 days before suggesting you'd be more comfortable in a hotel. How is that unfair? You're twisting this around. I'm not throwing you out. I'm suggesting that you might have more privacy and independence in your own place. My own place is a pile of splinters and drywall, in case you forgot." David rubbed his forehead, the way he did when client meetings weren't going according to plan. "Look, the insurance is covering temporary housing. Why not use that benefit to get your own space instead of imposing on us?" Imposing. There was the word I'd been waiting for. "I'm imposing," I said quietly. "That's not what I meant." "That's exactly what you meant." I walked to the window and looked out at David's perfectly manicured backyard. "Let me ask you something, son. If this situation were reversed, if your house got destroyed and you needed somewhere to stay, would I be telling you after a week that you should find a hotel?" David was quiet for a long moment. "That's different. How?" Because you have more flexibility than we do. Lisa and I have work schedules, social commitments, routines that don't include an old man cluttering up your guest room." "Dad, you're being dramatic." I turned to face him. "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my son is trying to get rid of me as quickly and politely as possible. I'm trying to help you maintain your independence and dignity while you figure out what you want to do next." "My dignity," I repeated. "You think shuffling me off to a hotel room is about my dignity?" "I think giving you space to make your own choices without feeling like a burden is about your dignity." "Yes, burden." Another word I'd been waiting to hear. "I see," I said. "Well, thank you for clarifying the situation. I walked toward the stairs, but David called after me. "Dad, wait. This doesn't have to be a fight. We can work something out that makes sense for everyone." "No," I said without turning around. "We can't, because what makes sense for you is getting me out of your house, and what makes sense for me is having a son who doesn't see his father as a problem to be solved." I went upstairs and started packing. Eleanor's photo album and the few items of clothing Lisa had loaned me into a grocery bag I'd found in the closet. It didn't take long when you lose everything in a tornado. Packing is simple. David appeared in the doorway as I was finishing. "What are you doing?" "What you want me to do. Leaving. Not like this." "Not angry. How did you expect me to leave?" "Grateful? I expected you to understand that this is difficult for everyone, and that sometimes the mature thing is to recognize when a situation isn't working." I stopped packing and looked at him. "You know what's not working, David? Raising a son who thinks family is something you tolerate until it becomes inconvenient. That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair?" "Fair would be a son who says, 'Dad, you're welcome here as long as you need to stay.' Fair would be a son who helps his father figure out what comes next instead of pushing him toward the cheapest solution. Fair would be a son who remembers that the man standing in his kitchen worked 2 jobs for 15 years to pay for the education that bought him this house." David's face flushed red. "I never asked you to sacrifice for my education. Of course you didn't. You were 8 years old when I started working double shifts at the plant. But I did it anyway, because that's what fathers do for their children, even when it's inconvenient." "Dad, I'm not finished." I picked up the grocery bag and faced him. "You know what I learned this week? I learned that blood doesn't make you family. Care does. Commitment does. Showing up when someone needs you does. And by that definition, you stop being my son somewhere between Tuesday and today." The words hung between us like smoke from a house, fire acrid and impossible to take back. David's voice was very quiet when he finally spoke. "If that's how you really feel, then maybe it is better if you leave." "Maybe it is." I walked past him down the stairs and through the living room where I'd sat with Lisa exactly a week ago, accepting her carefully offered sympathy and temporary hospitality. David followed me to the front door. "Where will you go?" "I'll figure it out." "Dad, don't be stupid. You don't have a car. You don't have money for a hotel. I have Social Security. I have savings, and I have 2 working legs. I'll be fine. Let me at least give you a ride somewhere." I turned to look at him one last time. "You've done enough." I walked out of his house into the warm May morning, carrying everything I owned in a paper bag and wondering if I just made the biggest mistake of my life. The Extended Stay America was exactly where David had said it would be. A 3-story building that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd heard about hotels but never actually seen one. The lobby smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams. "How long will you be staying?" asked the desk clerk, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Brittany. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Well, we have weekly and monthly rates if you're planning an extended visit." Extended visit. As if homelessness were a vacation you planned in advance. "Weekly for now," I said. The room was on the 2nd floor, accessible by an exterior staircase that reminded me of the apartment complexes I'd lived in when David and Sarah were small and money was tight. Everything was beige and brown and designed to be replaced easily when it wore out. But it was quiet, and it was mine for as long as I could afford it, and nobody was going to suggest that I'd be happier somewhere else. I sat on the bed and called Sarah. "Dad? I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. How are things going with David?" "Not great," I said. "I'm staying at a hotel now. What happened?" Asterisk, I told her about the conversation, about David's suggestions and my response. About walking out with everything I owned in a grocery bag. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Dad, I'm so sorry. I had no idea David was being like that. It's not your problem, sweetheart. Yes, it is. He's my brother, and what he's doing is wrong. What he's doing is practical. I just can't afford to be practical right now. Can you afford to be stubborn? It was a fair question, and one I didn't have a good answer for. I don't know, I said. But I know I can't afford to lose what's left of my self-respect. What are you going to do? I'm going to figure it out. One day at a time. Do you want me to fly out? I can probably get a few days off. No, honey. You have your own life to worry about. I'll be fine. But after we hung up, I wasn't sure if that was true. I spent the rest of Saturday walking around Edmond, getting familiar with the area around the hotel. There was a Walmart, a McDonald's, a library, a small park where families brought their children to play on swings and slides that hadn't been destroyed by forces beyond anyone's control. I sat on a bench and watched a father teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle, running beside her with his hand on the seat until she was steady enough to pedal on her own. When she finally managed a few wobbly circles around the parking lot, she turned to him with a grin that could have powered the whole city. Did you see, Daddy? Did you see me riding? I saw, he said, matching her grin with one of his own. I'm so proud of you. Such a simple thing. Being proud of someone you love, letting them know that their achievements matter to you, that their happiness is worth celebrating. I wondered when David had stopped feeling proud of me, or if he ever had. More importantly, I wondered if it was too late to find people who would. The answer to that question would come the next morning, from the most unlikely source imaginable. But that night, sitting in a hotel room that smelled like disinfectant and other people's disappointments, I wasn't thinking about possibilities. I was thinking about how quickly a life could fall apart, how easily the people you thought would catch you could decide you were too heavy to carry. I was thinking about what it meant to be truly alone for the first time in 71 years, and I was wondering if I was strong enough to build something new from the wreckage of everything I'd lost. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that makes everything look sadder than it actually is. I'd slept poorly in the hotel bed, waking up every few hours to the sound of trucks on the highway and the unfamiliar creaks and hums of a building full of strangers. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang. David. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before answering. Dad? His voice was carefully neutral. I wanted to check on you. Make sure you were settled. I'm fine. Good. That's good. A pause. Look, I know yesterday got heated, but I think we both said things we didn't mean. Did we? I hope we did. Because I don't want this to be how things end between us. I looked out the hotel window at the parking lot where a maintenance worker was collecting cigarette butts and empty beer cans left behind by other temporary residents. What do you want, David? I want to find a way forward that works for everyone. Lisa and I talked last night, and we think maybe we were too hasty about the timeline. The timeline for you staying with us. We're willing to extend it another week or two while you sort through your options. Another week or two. The generosity was overwhelming. That's very kind of you, I said. But I think I'll stay where I am. Dad, be reasonable. That hotel is costing you money you can't afford to spend. At least with us, you were saving the temporary housing allowance from insurance. I'd rather spend my money on a place where I'm welcome than save it in a place where I'm not. You are welcome. I never said you weren't welcome. You said I was imposing. You said having me there was affecting your routines and your privacy. You suggested I'd be more comfortable in a hotel. How exactly is that being welcome? David sighed. I was trying to be practical about a difficult situation, and I'm trying to preserve what's left of my dignity, By living in a hotel room that probably costs more per week than most people's rent? By not staying where I'm not wanted? Another pause. What do you want from me, Dad? What would it take for you to come back? I thought about that question. What would it take? An apology? An acknowledgement that he treated me badly? A promise that things would be different? I want you to want me there, I said finally. Not tolerate me, not accommodate me out of obligation, but actually want your father around while he's going through the worst thing that's ever happened to him. Of course I want you around. No, you don't. You want me taken care of, which is different. You want me settled somewhere that doesn't inconvenience you, with people who are paid to deal with my problems so you don't have to. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked about my life, my health, my happiness, not because you needed information to solve a problem, but because you cared about the answer? David was quiet for so long I thought the call might have dropped. I call, he said finally. You call when you need something or when you feel obligated to check in. That's different from caring. I do care. Dad, I care enough to want you safe and secure and properly looked after. By other people. By qualified people who can provide services I can't. I don't need services, David. I need family. I need someone who's glad to see me when I walk in the room instead of someone who's calculating how long they can stand having me around. That's not fair, maybe not, but it's honest. We hung up without resolving anything, and I spent the rest of Sunday morning walking around Edmond in the drizzle, trying to figure out what came next. Answer came from Maria Santos. I'd stopped at a small Mexican restaurant for lunch, the kind of place with plastic chairs and handwritten menus and food that actually tasted like someone's grandmother had made it. I was sitting alone at a corner table, working on a plate of enchiladas and trying not to think about the conversation with David, when a woman at the next table started choking. It was exactly like the incident at Cracker Barrel, except this time the woman was about my age and dining alone. She stood up, clutching her throat, panic in her eyes as she tried unsuccessfully to cough up whatever was blocking her airway. I didn't hesitate. I stepped behind her chair and performed the Heimlich maneuver, 3 sharp thrusts that dislodged a piece of pork from her windpipe and sent it flying across the restaurant. She gasped and coughed, and took great shuddering breaths while I held her steady, until she could support herself. Thank you, she wheezed, tears streaming down her face. Oh my God, thank you. Are you okay? Do you need me to call an ambulance? No, I think I'm all right. Just shaken up. She looked at me with the kind of gratitude usually reserved for people who've just saved your life, which I suppose I had. I'm Maria Santos, Frank Patterson. Frank Patterson. You are officially my guardian angel. The restaurant manager appeared with water and napkins and the kind of concerned attention that suggested this wasn't something that happened every day. Other diners were staring and whispering, but Maria waved away offers to call paramedics. I'm fine, she insisted. Thanks to Frank here. Are you sure you shouldn't go to the hospital? I asked. Just to get checked out? I'm sure, but I'm not sure I should finish lunch alone after nearly dying. Would you ... She gestured to the empty chair at her table. Would you mind keeping me company? I promised to chew more carefully. I moved my plate to her table and learned that Maria Santos was 73 years old, recently widowed, and dealing with her own version of starting over late in life. Roberto died 8 months ago, she told me over coffee and flan. 51 years of marriage, and then suddenly I'm living alone for the first time since I was 22. That's hard, I said. Harder than I expected. Not just the loneliness, though that's brutal, but all the practical things nobody prepares you for. Learning to manage finances, making decisions by yourself, figuring out what you actually want to do with your time when nobody else's schedule matters. What have you figured out? that I don't want to spend the rest of my life sitting in an empty house feeling sorry for myself. She smiled. That's why I started volunteering at the community center, teaching ESL classes to immigrants, helping with the food pantry, organizing activities for seniors who don't have family nearby. That sounds meaningful. It is. More meaningful than I expected, actually. There's something powerful about being useful to people who genuinely need what you have to offer. I thought about David's suggestions about assisted living, about being surrounded by services and activities designed to keep elderly people occupied and out of trouble. What about your family? I asked. Do they worry about you living alone? Maria's expression darkened slightly. My son thinks I should sell the house and move into one of those senior communities. Says it would be safer, more convenient, better for my health. What do you think? I think he wants to sell my house so he can inherit the money while I'm still alive to see him spend it. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. He calls it maximizing my resources for optimal care outcomes. I call it getting Mom out of the way so we can pretend we're not worried about taking care of her when she gets really old. Sounds familiar. You have adult children too? I told her about David, about the tornado, about the past week and the conversation that morning. She listened without interrupting, nodding at the parts that clearly resonated with her own experience. You know what I learned after Roberto died? She said when I finished. I learned that some people see aging as something that happens to you, and other people see it as something you do. Your son sees it as something that's happening to you, something he needs to manage and contain and solve. And how do you see it? As something I'm doing. Actively, intentionally, on my own terms. She leaned forward. Frank, can I ask you something? What do you actually want to do with the rest of your life? It was such a simple question, but nobody had asked me that. Not David with his assisted living brochures, not the insurance adjuster with his timelines and estimates, not even Sarah with her well-meaning concern. I don't know, I said honestly. I spent 40 years working at the plant, then 15 years taking care of Eleanor while she was sick. I'm not sure I've ever thought about what I wanted independent of what other people needed from me. Then maybe that's where you start. We talked for another hour about loss and family and what it meant to build a life that felt worth living instead of just survivable. When we finally got ready to leave, Maria wrote her phone number on a napkin. I meant what I said about you being my guardian angel, she told me. But maybe I can return the favor sometime. How's that? By introducing you to some people who might need what you have to offer. I didn't understand what she meant until Tuesday, when she called to ask if I wanted to volunteer with her at the community center. We're starting a disaster preparedness program for seniors, she explained, teaching people how to put together emergency kits, what to do during severe weather, how to help neighbors who might need assistance. I thought someone with your experience might have something valuable to contribute. My experience? Frank, you survived a tornado that destroyed everything you owned, and you're still standing. You know how to perform life-saving first aid. You understand what it's like to start over when everything familiar has been taken away. That's not just experience, that's wisdom. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. When do we start? The Edmond Community Center was a low brick building that had probably been modern in 1987 and now looked like it was trying very hard to stay relevant. But the people inside were anything but outdated. Maria introduced me to Dorothy, who was 86 and had been widowed for 10 years but still drove herself everywhere and organized the center's food drives. To James, who was 74 and taught woodworking classes to teenagers whose schools had cut their shop programs. To Carmen, who was 68 and had started a support group for people dealing with late-life career changes. Frank survived the Moore County tornado. Maria announced to the group of 12 seniors who'd shown up for the emergency preparedness meeting. He's going to help us understand what it's really like when disaster strikes. For the next 2 hours, I found myself telling stories I didn't know I had. About the importance of having important documents in waterproof containers. About why battery-powered radios were more reliable than cell phones during power outages. About the psychological impact of losing everything and how communities could support people through that trauma. But more than that, I found myself feeling useful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. These people weren't just being polite or killing time, they were genuinely interested in what I had to teach them. Have you thought about doing this professionally? Dorothy asked afterward. FEMA has programs for disaster preparedness educators. The Red Cross trains volunteer instructors. I'm not qualified for something like that. You're more qualified than most people with certificates, James said. You've lived it. That's worth more than any classroom training. On the drive back to the hotel, Maria was quiet until we stopped at a red light. How did that feel? She asked. Good, I said, surprised by how true it was. Really good. Better than sitting in your hotel room feeling sorry for yourself? Much better? Better than living in your son's guest room waiting for him to get tired of you? I thought about that. Yeah, it was. Then maybe that's your answer. What answer? To the question of what you want to do with the rest of your life. I was still thinking about that conversation. Thursday morning when David called again, Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation Sunday, and I want to make you an offer. I'm listening. What if you came back to stay with us, but we set up some ground rules? Boundaries that work for everyone? What kind of boundaries? Well, maybe you could contribute to household expenses, help with groceries and utilities, and maybe we could establish some privacy guidelines like knocking before entering rooms, or coordinating schedules so we're not all trying to use the kitchen at the same time. I felt something settle in my chest, something that might have been disappointment or relief. David, I said quietly, do you hear yourself? What do you mean? You're talking about your homeless father like he's a problematic roommate you're interviewing. I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. No, you're trying to find a way to tolerate me. And you know what? I don't want to be tolerated. Dad, I want to be somewhere I'm wanted. Somewhere I'm valued for who I am instead of managed like a problem that needs solving. Where exactly is that going to be? It was a fair question, and one I finally had an answer to. I don't know yet, I said. But I know it's not with you. So that's it? You're just going to throw away our relationship because I can't give you everything you want? I'm not throwing anything away. David, I'm finally admitting that what I want from you, a son who's happy to see his father, who values his presence, who treats him like family instead of an obligation, isn't something you're capable of giving me right now. And what am I supposed to do with that? Whatever you want. That's the beauty of being an adult with your own life and your own priorities. You get to choose what matters to you. You matter to me. No, David, your idea of what I should be matters to you. Your vision of a father who's conveniently settled and safely managed matters to you. But me, the actual person I am? I don't think you've been interested in that person for a very long time. After we hung up, I sat in my hotel room and made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I called the Haldi insurance company and told them I wasn't rebuilding. I wanted the settlement. I called a realtor and put the empty lot up for sale. I called the Red Cross and asked about their disaster preparedness training programs. And I called Sarah to let her know that I was starting over. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Dad, are you sure about this? She asked. Giving up the house, the insurance money for rebuilding? I'm sure. That house was the home Eleanor and I built together. Without her, it was just a building full of memories I'm not sure I need to keep carrying around. And David? David and I will figure out what kind of relationship we can have, if any. But it won't be one where I pretend to be grateful for scraps of attention and tolerance. I'm proud of you, Sarah said, and the words hit me like a physical force. For what? For choosing yourself. For deciding what you want instead of just accepting what other people think you should want. 6 months later, I'm living in a small apartment near the Edmond Community Center, working part-time as a disaster preparedness instructor for the Red Cross and volunteering 3 days a week with Maria's programs for seniors. I have friends now, real friends, who call to check on me not because they need something but because they enjoy talking to me. I have work that feels meaningful, skills that are valued, knowledge that makes a difference in other people's lives, and I have a family of choice that includes Maria and Dorothy and James and Carmen and dozens of other people who've decided that aging is something you do actively, intentionally, with purpose and dignity. David and I talk occasionally. Brief, polite conversations about the weather and my health and his work. He still thinks I made a mistake, giving up the security he thought I should want in favor of the independence I actually needed. Maybe. Someday he'll understand the difference. Maybe. Someday he'll realize that home isn't a place where you're safe from the world, but a place where the world is better because you're in it. Until then, I'm building something new from the wreckage of everything I lost. Not because I have to, but because I finally learned that I could. The tornado took my house, but it gave me something more valuable, the chance to discover what I was made of when everything familiar was stripped away. Turns out I'm made of stronger stuff than anyone, including me, ever imagined. And that's a foundation you can build anything on.